I love it when a series is complicated and as jargon-filled as The Peripheral. I love when they start using words like doodad or thingamabob to sort of explain some of the complicated things that they discuss or talk about here. It doesn't help anything, but it's a choice. Hello, everyone. Terrence here with Hollywood Already Did It. If you haven't already, go ahead, like, share, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, ring that bell below. Anytime we have something, you will be among the first to know. Like I said, way behind, but I'm catching up. So the seventh episode of The Peripheral is dropped. It's called The Doodad. Doodad is the episode that I think they try to kind of give us as much information as they possibly can to sort of lay out everything. They're like, all right, these are all the chips that we have so far. We're going to give them to you. Unfortunately, it just makes things that much more complicated for this show, and it sort of muddies the water a little bit of how I kind of feel about certain aspects of the show. Because the one thing that I think the show always had going for it is that it's sprinkled enough to kind of keep the story going. This one sort of pauses the story, and it's like, I'm going to now just word vomit out to you everything that's kind of going on, and then you as the audience member are like, well, then that makes even less sense. And then you start seeing characters are also confused by it. You're like, well, now you guys are just talking at me and throwing things at me, and I can't decipher or make heads or tails of this. But there are some fun things and some simple things that actually do happen in this episode. It starts off with the matriarch of the Fishers, Ella, losing her vision again. And so it's interesting because she always felt like, hey, if you don't do something, or we've been given this gift, what is it that you have to do to pay off the debt that is that I can see. But also I kind of wonder now that, like, hey, if they gave her this vision, not necessarily that they can take it back, but maybe they made it only temporary enough to get her to do what they need to do, but knowing that, hey, it's eventually going to go away and she's not going to really be able to see again. But whatever the case, we'll get there somewhere down the line. Maybe not. But she loses her vision and she calls on Therese, one of the guards hired by Burton, to take her to the hospital for Tommy's wife to kind of look at her and see what's going on. They leave the compound. Mind you, nobody's watching the compound. And then Bob is sort of watching them and he follows them. While there, Bob manages to cut himself pretty severely, but in a way that he knows he's not killing himself. But to be able to sort of make his way into the hospital, the medical facility, without much warning. What's interesting about that, though, and there's a reason why I'm a little bit slow in even describing that, how he gets in there, he could have made it in there with or without doing that. Because it becomes a knife fight anyway. I feel like he did more that and harmed himself than it was truly necessary for him to actually make himself way into that room. Because the doctor's in the back with Ella. Maybe he didn't know that, but still, even then, I feel like he could have subdued the three of them in that room. The only person he would have had to fight is Reese. He does have a one-on-one fight. It's probably one of the better fight sequences that occur in this show. And even in that, he gets the better of him, but even in that, he kind of respects. It's like, this guy gave me. It's like, Jesus, I didn't expect this type of a fight out of somebody here like that. He then calls Ella and the doc out to sort of have a convo with him, and Ella puts two and two together that this is the person that was on the bridge trying to kill my kids, and now he's the one responsible for trying to take them out. And so he sort of created a trap for Flynn, Burton, and to a lesser extent, Connor. The last episode we left with Flynn, Connor, and Burton entering the Peripheral and seeing Lowbeer, the head of the police, and she wants to continue interrogating and have some conversations with him, but she doesn't want to do it in front of Lev and his team. She's like, well, let's go somewhere a little bit more private and have a further conversation. They do, not that they could disagree, but they agree. But Flynn does ask for Wilf to come with him. A little bit, oh, you've made a connection already. But much to the chagrin of Lev. Lev doesn't, like, why, he seems pissed at the fact that Wilf is going. Wilf seems very confused. They all go to this place called the zoo, which is like a training facility for the police. And in that, Little Beer makes like an 8-level thing to basically, for her, it seems like it's just to kind of like, hey, just get them away. Let's get Connor and Burton away from Flynn because she's the one I actually really want to talk to. But for her, there's also sort of a way to track to see how good they are in these suits because it's the first time they're using these suits. Like, are they going to be weapons? How good tactically are they? So she's having Beatrice, her number two, who we later learn is a little bit more important. Her number two helping to kind of train them and see where they're at while she has a one-on-one with Flynn. And in that, we start learning about more alternate timelines. There's a timeline where Flynn is married to Tommy. Wilf doesn't really like that. In that timeline, Connor, they never got the haptics because that happened post. RI was built post while things were speeding up. The events of the jackpot happened earlier. RI is built later. And so the timeline for that one is getting a little mucked up. So Connor doesn't have the haptic suit and he dies in battle. So there are certain things that are different. And it's like in this one world, the jackpot, it seems to be now speeding up and more faster than it was before. And Lowbeer kind of is going tit for tat, just mainly trying to fill out who Flynn is. And Flynn gets a little bit to ask her some questions. And she basically comes to the question and stops it dead there where you said and mentioned that you were able to kind of shut this off and cut me and pull me out of this at any point in time. Is that true? It's like I'm not answering that. I did mention that Connor kept his limbs in the other timeline. But Lowbeer says she gets all this information from these things called the aunties, which is something else they just throw in there. But it's an algorithm-based system that allows them to sort of peek into other things. And Flynn checks Wolf and is like, hey, I thought you said this wasn't possible. And he's like, well, it's not. And Lowbeer's like, hey, it's not for people like him. Only certain people are allowed to access that type of stuff. But that whole dialogue back and forth just creates more questions than it does answers. So it's just like, sure, I guess. When Flynn does start turning the questions and asking, and Lowbeer kind of shuts it down, that is also at the same time she sends her home. She shuts her down and sends her home, and that's the same time that Burton and Connor make it to the top of the roof and have to then battle each other to take out Beatrice. It's at that point Connor dies first, and it's at that point that Beatrice gets a little bit of love letter from Connor. Connor has been smitten by this robot, and then she kills him by pushing him off. And so all three of them wake up in the real world, and it's like, oh my god, that was a rush. Connor's like, I'm gonna marry that woman because he's now head over heels, and he loves everything that's happening in that world. He hasn't felt this alive in ages. So no matter how dangerous that world feels or gets or whatever is happening, he wants more of it. He wants more of it now. But they wake up in the real world and they get a message from Reese, what they believe to be Reese, as in that moment, that says, hey, such and such has happened. Your mom, we're at the hospital. Come check on your mom. As they're going, because this has been going on for a while, and Bob has been sending messages by using Reese's facial recognition to open it up and sending messages that don't sound like Reese. So this is what sort of becomes a dead giveaway. But he has been waiting there for a while because he didn't know that they were off in the peripheral. So he's like, where are they? Like, let's get them here. They finally start making their way there. Then they get a second message from Reese that uses language that they would never hear from their mother. So then they know the jig is up. They pull up a little bit further away from the hospital, the doctor's office. And Flynn is ready to go in, balls out, like, hey, my mama's in there. And Burton's like, hey, this is what I do. This is my world. Let me do this. I'm not going to let anything happen, but we're really good at this. Let us do it. And in that, they come up with a plan. They devise a plan to sort of jumpstart via the haptics because they weren't able to get any readings off of Reese's haptics. So they were able to jumpstart the haptics to kind of make them twitch a little bit because when they see the heat signatures of three people in there, they don't know which one of those is Bob. There's two off to the left and there's one off to the right. They think the one off to the right is Bob, but they can't verify it because they're just looking at heat signatures. So they make the code body of Flynn twitch just a bit, which is going to have some negative ramifications because once Bob gets up and shoots Reese, the person who is reaching in via the haptics is going to feel it, but it's worth it. So he gets the body to twitch a little bit. Bob gets up and goes to shoot, and that's when they shoot through the roof and take Bob out. Bob's off the board. Assassin Bob is no more. It's a cool little sequence. It shows you how good Burton and Connor and them really are. It also shows you how good those haptics are and what they all can kind of do. But it's a fascinating little way to do that. And then Bob's off the board. It's interesting, in this episode, we wipe a lot of people off the board. A lot of the perils that they have in present day are taken off the board. Because while all of that is happening, Tommy is doing a sort of global search about himself. Tommy's been the one character that I haven't really appreciated that much in the show because he's been very much you aren't doing anything. You're just kind of just now moping around and saying, and being the lapdog of everything. No one's really believing you, or they're kind of like tapping you on the hand and you kind of just take it. He's been the butt of a lot of jokes and a lot of punishment. So, in this episode is the Tommy Get Some Balls episode. Tommy is trying to still follow the lead of what happened to that evidence. So he goes to the precinct and meets up with the person who had taken the evidence into custody. She's like, no, none of that stuff's here. So he goes to the car and the impound because that's the only thing that has been taken in to see what he can find. And in there, he finds the gun, the original gun that Bob had, and then the futuristic gun that the sheriff had. And it's all sort of locked in evidence, but locked within that place. He uses the gun from the future and kind of sees how much power it has. Like, what the heck is that? And at that point, he gets a call from his boss, the sheriff, like, hey, come here quickly. Something's gone down. I need you immediately. And he's like, I thought I was Vince. He's like, you were, but I need you now. He gets to Corporal's mansion, and he comes in and he sees the doors propped open, and he sees basically an untouched crime scene because he finds Corporal's wife dead. She's dead in the middle of the ground, blood all over the place, and then a foot trail of blood that goes to outside. He takes his gun out, unholsters it, and goes to see what's going on. And at that point, he sees Sheriff Jackman and Corporal outside chit-chatting. And Corporal's like, what did you bring him for? And Sheriff's kind of like, he's got to be in on it because they need a way to sort of clean this up. Sheriff is demanding that Tommy go get Flynn, both Fishers, Flynn and Burton. Burton is the main one he wants, but he's like, he just throws Flynn in because they want to ask him some questions. And Tommy's like, well, what do they have to do with anything? He's like, well, don't ask questions. And he basically is telling him, like, you now need to open up your eyes. You know, you've always known what the hell was going on in this town. You've always known that Corporal runs everything. You've always known that I was under him. You always know that you worked in an indirect way. You worked for him. Stop playing this dumb game and get on board, or don't, and we will shame you. And so he comes up with this elaborate story of like, this is how this plays out, blah blah blah. You didn't do your job and you let Bob go. Bob came here, killed her, so forth and so forth. Burton is in over his head in some type of drug scheme and his sister's in on it, so bring them in. Blah, blah, blah. Tom is like, and just standing there looking like a doofus. So at that point, he goes to his car and he kind of beats himself up. He's like, you are so dumb. Like, why are you this stupid? Like, get some testicular fortitude for my WWE fans. Get some of that. And he kind of has come to Jesus moment. He grabs the gun, Bob's gun, and he grabs the sonic gun. He takes them both. And then he heads back into Corporal's mansion, and he tells another story. He tells a story of how this is going to go and what this actually is. He's like, when Bob came back in here, and he shot the sheriff. I did not mean to sound like the song, but he shot the sheriff. And at that point, Tommy then empties the clip into Sheriff Jackman. Corporal's like, well, shit, I didn't expect you to do that. I didn't know you had the balls to do that. And he starts talking stuff to Tommy, and Tommy's in it now. He's like, look, I'm going to start shooting everybody. But it's at that point Corporal's like, hey, you don't have the balls to shoot me. Plus, you've emptied your clip. You don't have enough bullets. And then that's when Tommy switches from the gun to the Doodad, if you will. It's a corny read line how he says it because he said it earlier. It's like, oh, the Doodad thingamabob. And then this one, Corporal was like, what the hell is that? He's like, it's a Doodad. Sure. And then he shoots him. Corporal flies through the glass. Now, at that moment, I don't think Corporal's dead. I don't. And based on some of this stuff that looks like we're getting in the next episode, it seems like there was a pulse to one of them. It definitely ain't the sheriff. So I think Corporal is still around. So here's where this episode starts throwing in a few things that kind of become like, oh, cool. I was wrong in the fact that I thought the stuff that was happening in the future or the alternate timeline, the health boosters that they had, and that Flynn didn't have one, was causing her pain, or that was what was causing her health issues. Was wrong there. What it is that in the first episode, when it was supposed to be Burton that checked into the sim, if you will, Alita uploaded a thing that was supposed to go and store into his haptic. It was coded so that his haptic, because that's how she saw from the future when the flashback sequence that we seen, she saw that they had haptics. She's like, okay, I'm going to put a message in there and put a code in there that it'll get to them in their haptics. Unfortunately, Flynn is the one who went in there, and so Flynn doesn't have a haptic, so it just went into her bloodstream, into her brain. So that is where the coded message has been this whole time, which is causing her some ill effects and some mental things and causing her to pass out and have all that stuff. It is affecting her brain function. But that's where it's stored because she doesn't have the same things that her brother had. It's also she's completely unaware that it exists. This is all found out via Lev, Osaya, and Ash. Osaya and Ash have been conning and planning to betray Lev for some time, and they've been using their language to do so. But Lev can understand their language, which they were not aware. But he lets them know in this episode that I've heard everything you've been planning. And Lev's already on edge because Blowbeard and them are about to bring the hammer down. And so he's like, well, now you two are planning to turn on me. So he gets a knife and he's planning to stab Osaya unless Ash tells him what the plans are. And after a little bit of back and forth, she finally does. That's where she lets him know that Alita got it wrong because she thought she was uploading to Burton, and instead she wound up uploading to Flynn, who was not capable of it. So it's in her brain. She shows her the imaging of her brain, and that's where everything is. And he's like, well, what's the plan? So like, what do you plan to do? It's like, I need to get this information, and we need to stop it because I want to burn the world down. Like, I want to burn it all down. And Lev's like, hold on. That seems excessive. I get what your plan is. I'm not going to kill you, traitors, but once you get this information, once you get it, bring it to me. But we're not burning anything down. We're not doing that. The sort of best sequence for me that happens in this, because you get the two alphas, are Lowbeer and Charisse. Lowbeer returns after meeting Flynn and Burton and Connor and sort of has a debrief with Beatrice. And Beatrice is telling him that, like, these two men can fight. Connor's the more tactical and more sensible, like he gets it all. There's no, it's a more rigid system. Speed's a little slower, but there's more of a control and you know what you're getting out of him, whereas Connor can be a little bit more something else. But she says she still likes Connor. And it's at that point where you start realizing, like, oh wait, she's like, and I don't know why I said that. Like, because I clearly can see that Burton's probably the better of the two. But there's something, because Connor has shown some type of affection for her, whatever AI she has is now sort of reciprocating that back, unconsciously, subconsciously, if you will. It's at that point that Cherie shows up. And Lowbeer knew that she was coming, but didn't know it was going to be that fast. And in that moment, Charisse and them have a tit for tat. And she's like, look, Flynn has something of mine. And it's a lot of documents and a lot of information that you don't want out in the main world. You don't want it out in people's hands because it can destroy everything that we build. It can destroy all of it in the blink of an eye. And you don't want that because this thing that is out there can it's like a neural adjustment mechanism. It can completely change somebody's behavior. Thus causing just a mass chaos and an extinction level event, if you will. It seems like they are on level footing, but it does seem like Lowbeer is very cautious with Charisse around. Charisse simply implores Lowbeer, like, hey, I think it would be in the best interest of all involved if you kill Lev and his entire family and Flynn and her entire family in both the alternate world and in the stub, which the stub is the Flynn, Burton, Ella, like that whole family, where Assassin Bob is. The main timeline, or the 2032 timeline, is the stub. She wants you to kill Lev and all those versions of them, and Flynn and all those versions of them, because those are the two that are causing the most chaos in this world. You wipe them off the board, everything should be fine. And that's what I want from you. What's interesting is that Lowbeer doesn't answer. She doesn't say no. She doesn't say yes. She's kind of thinking about it. It's an option. The pull the plug, if you will, option. It kind of depends on, I think, the conversations that she's been having with Flynn to see how far or how much she believes Flynn is aware of what's going on and how good Flynn, Connor, and Burton can kind of be the champions of this world. She might be okay with taking out Lev, but I don't know if she has that same energy for Flynn. She doesn't seem like she does yet. It also doesn't seem like Little Bear is the sort of the quintessential villain. It seems like that's all Charisse. It seems like Little Bear is that kind of bridge in between that can do some filthy things and Lev's completely frightened of, but doesn't and is on the same level or if not above Charisse. But Charisse is the complete and total bad guy. Which it's good there's somebody left because as of this episode, it appears that Assassin Bob is gone and we're left to believe that Corbel is, which I just don't see you're getting rid of that character that easily. Plus, there are still ties with his nephew and his niece-in-law, is that a thing? His nephew and niece that he kind of has to operate a little bit more. I think you still need to have one villain or a set of villains in the present, the 2032 timeline, as well as a villain in the future. So it's too clean for them to kind of get over Corbel that fast. All in all, a good episode. We get very, very wordy. We get some answers. But we also get more things thrown at us and more jargon thrown at us into a world that is starting to kind of become that Westworldian where it's like, okay, guys, this is a lot. You keep throwing more and more and more on top. Some things need to be answered before we can start building on to the next thing. This also is the first episode, probably since the original episode and the stuff that's kind of happened on the bridge, that has multiple action pieces in it. We have the training sequence going up like Judge Dredd style up the levels, and we have it's not really an action sequence, but it's the shooting. It's more of an espionage spy situation. But we do have the fight sequence between the assassin and Reese, Bob and Reese, in the thing. And it's a pretty well done sequence. This has probably been the biggest episode that had mixed sci-fi jargon with action, which I think is done on purpose because I think if you're trying to introduce this much sci-fi, you gotta kind of clean the palette on the other end. But I think this show has also had a weird thing of some episodes have zero action and then some have, like this one has a bunch of it. It reminds me a lot of The Old Man for FX. Now I know that one occurred because of some health issues to their lead, but that first episode of Old Man, like the first episode of this, felt like it was going to have a lot more action in it, but then it dissipated. That sort of happened here too, but this is the first episode that sort of picks all of that back up. There's quite a bit of action in this episode, which makes me believe the next one is going to have nada. What did you guys think about the 7th episode of the Peripheral called Doodad? Just leave your thoughts and comments in the comments below. If you haven't already, you can follow us on Twitter at HollywoodADI. You can hit us up on email at HollywoodAlreadyDidIt@gmail.com. We also have a podcast with the same name that's on Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere that plays podcasts. We're there. And like always, I got my ticket. You got yours.